Willow Creek was a small, close-knit community, the kind where neighbors knew each other by name, and children played together in the streets. The Williams family was well-known and well-liked. Sarah Williams, a kind-hearted elementary school teacher, and her husband Thomas, a charming real estate agent, were often described as the perfect couple. They had 2 children, Emily and Jack, both of whom excelled in school and were active in local youth programs. For years their life seemed like the definition of suburban bliss. But on February 15, 2023, everything began to unravel. It was late in the evening when Sarah found it, a folded piece of paper tucked under a stack of Thomas's real estate contracts. Her heart raced as she unfolded it. The paper contained only a name, Samantha, and a phone number. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had no idea who Samantha was, but one thing was clear: her husband was keeping secrets. At first, Sarah convinced herself that it was nothing, a harmless mistake, a mix-up in contacts. But the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. She stayed up late that night watching the clock tick down, her mind racing. Eventually she confronted Thomas when he came home. "What's this?" Sarah asked, holding up the piece of paper. Thomas froze. His eyes darted around, avoiding her gaze. I can explain." And so he did. Thomas confessed to an affair with a woman named Samantha, someone he had met a few months earlier through his real estate dealings. The revelation stung, but it wasn't the affair itself that shook Sarah to her core, it was what Thomas revealed next. "I never meant for you to find out like this," Thomas said, his voice tinged with guilt. "There's more. I got involved in something I can't just walk away from. I've been trying to protect you." "What do you mean, protect me?" Sarah's voice trembled. What could be worse than this? Thomas hesitated, and when he spoke again, his words were barely above a whisper. "I've been involved in an underground business deal. Illegal. I didn't want to drag you into it, but now, it's too late." For a moment, Sarah just stood there trying to process the words. Her mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all. "What kind of business deal? What are you talking about?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a phone. It wasn't his. The phone was old, scratched with a cracked screen. He handed it to Sarah. "I don't know how to get out of this, but I've been getting threats." Sarah looked at the phone. She could feel her hands shaking as she unlocked it. Inside there were encrypted messages, numbers and names she didn't recognize. But there was one message in particular that sent chills down her spine. "If you want out, we'll make sure your family pays the price." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just about an affair. This was something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. "Who are these people? What did you get involved in?" Sarah demanded. "I never meant for it to go this far," Thomas replied, his voice cracking. "I thought it was just a one-time thing, just a deal here and there. But it's bigger than that. There's no way out now." The night was long and Sarah's mind raced. She barely slept, the thought of her family's safety haunting her every second. Was Thomas telling the truth? Or had something far darker been lurking beneath the surface of their perfect life all along? On February 18, 2023, Sarah made a decision. She would find out everything, no matter the cost. While Thomas was away on one of his so-called business trips, she took his phone once again. She scrolled through the messages, trying to piece together the puzzle. There was a name that kept appearing, the broker. Sarah had no idea who this person was, but the name kept popping up in the encrypted messages. Then, something even more chilling happened. Just as Sarah was about to investigate further, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She picked up the phone. "Sarah, it's me," Thomas's voice was shaking. "You need to stop looking into this. It's not just about us anymore. They're watching you. You need to stay safe." Her heart skipped a beat. She could hear the panic in his voice, but it was too late. The truth had already begun to unfold. The deeper she dug, the more danger she could feel closing in on her and her children. And then, just as Sarah was about to respond, she heard something that made her blood run cold, a knock at the door. The knock on the door sent a wave of fear through Sarah's body. Her heart pounded in her chest as she held the phone to her ear, her fingers shaking. "Thomas?" she whispered, barely able to hear his voice over the rising panic. "Sarah, you need to listen to me. Get out of the house. Now." Thomas's voice was frantic, almost pleading. "They're here." The line went dead. Sarah's eyes darted around the room. She wasn't sure who was on the other side of that door, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't safe anymore. She moved quickly, glancing out the window. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a black SUV parked across the street, the windows tinted so dark that she couldn't see who was inside. She dropped the phone onto the counter and grabbed her purse, tossing it over her shoulder. She looked at the kids, sleeping soundly in their rooms, unaware of the danger that had suddenly descended upon their lives. Her first thought was to leave, but she couldn't just abandon them. Her hands shook as she crept down the hall, making sure the kids stayed asleep. As she reached the door, another knock echoed through the house, this one more urgent, more forceful. She froze. Whoever was outside, they weren't going away. Before she could make a decision, the doorbell rang. Sarah's heart stopped for a second. Was this it? Were the people Thomas had warned her about finally here to make good on their threats? She pressed herself against the wall, her breath shallow and quick. The seconds felt like hours. Every nerve in her body was screaming at her to act. To do something. Anything. The doorbell rang again. She had no choice. With trembling hands, she grabbed the phone and called the one person who might be able to help, Detective Michael Harris, a friend of the family who had worked with Thomas on a few real estate-related cases in the past. She'd never thought she'd be calling him for something like this, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "Detective Harris, it's Sarah Williams," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to come here right now. I don't know who's at the door, but Thomas said they're here. They're coming for me, for us." Harris's voice was calm but urgent. "Stay inside, Sarah. Lock the door and don't let anyone in. I'm on my way. Don't open the door unless you're sure it's someone you trust." The tension was unbearable as she sat in the darkened hallway, waiting for Harris to arrive. Every second felt like an eternity. The knocks on the door persisted, each one louder than the last. Sarah's mind raced. Who were these people? What had Thomas gotten them into? And what was the real reason he had kept so many secrets? She kept her phone close, her eyes darting back and forth between the door and the window. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft click, the unmistakable sound of a door handle turning. Sarah's heart lurched in her chest as she realized that someone was trying to get in. In that moment, panic set in. She had no idea how much time she had left. She rushed to the window, pulling back the blinds just enough to peek outside. The SUV was still there, but now there were two men standing by the vehicle, talking in hushed tones. Then one of the men turned, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He was looking directly at her. Her pulse raced as she ducked behind the window, trying to steady her breathing. She couldn't let them see her. They must have known she was inside. Were they the ones who had been sending Thomas those threats? The doorbell rang again, this time accompanied by a loud, insistent knocking. "Sarah, open the door," a man's voice shouted from the other side. His tone was calm but commanding, as though he expected her to comply without question. "We need to talk. This is the only chance you'll get." For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Should she answer? Should she let them in? She knew the answers to those questions, and they were all terrifying. If she opened the door, she might be walking straight into the hands of whoever Thomas had gotten mixed up with. But if she didn't, who knew what they'd do to her, or to her family? Just as she was about to make a decision, a loud crash came from the front door, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Someone had forced their way inside. Sarah froze. The cold, hollow sound echoed through the house like a death knell. Her heart thundered in her chest as the realization hit her. They were already inside. In that instant, her survival instincts kicked in. She grabbed her purse, shoved her phone back into her pocket, and ran. She wasn't sure where she was going, only that she needed to get out. To hide. To protect herself and her children at all costs. She burst through the back door, heart racing, and bolted down the narrow alleyway behind the house. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she ran, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. She didn't look back. She couldn't. All she knew was that she had to find help, and fast. As Sarah disappeared into the night, the men inside the house searched methodically, checking every room, every closet. The house was eerily silent now, save for the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. It was clear, they had no intention of letting her escape. And that was when Sarah made a shocking discovery of her own, hidden deep within the mess Thomas had left behind. What she found would change everything, revealing a truth that no one could have predicted. The question now was, would Sarah survive long enough to expose it? The cold night air bit at Sarah's skin as she sprinted down the alley, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Her heart raced as she looked over her shoulder, half expecting to see the men who had broken into her home in pursuit. But there was no sign of them. They were still inside, methodically searching for her, unaware of the deadly discovery she had made just moments ago. She had stumbled across something Thomas had hidden in the farthest corner of the garage, a stack of old boxes pushed behind a broken shelf, covered in years of dust. As she frantically rifled through the boxes, she found a small, unmarked envelope sealed with wax. Her hands trembled as she opened it, and inside, there was a single sheet of paper with a name written in bold, deliberate handwriting: Mason Clark. Mason Clark. The name was unfamiliar, yet the sense of dread that washed over Sarah told her that whoever this person was, they were central to the darkness that had been haunting her family. A sudden noise from the house snapped her back to reality. The men were moving fast now, and it wouldn't be long before they realized she was gone. Without hesitation, she shoved the letter into her jacket pocket and sprinted towards the nearest street. Her mind raced. Who was Mason Clark? And why was his name hidden away by Thomas, the man she thought she knew so well? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car approaching. She turned to see a familiar figure, a black sedan with tinted windows. The headlights illuminated the street, casting long shadows against the walls. The car slowed as it neared her, and the window rolled down. It was Detective Harris. "Sarah, get in," he shouted urgently. Without thinking, Sarah rushed to the car and jumped into the passenger seat. The moment she slammed the door shut, the car sped off into the night. As they drove away, Sarah's eyes darted nervously to the rearview mirror. She half expected to see the black SUV that had been parked outside her house following them. But there was nothing, just the empty street behind them. "Are you all right?" Harris asked, his voice low and steady. He seemed to be more focused on the road than on her, but she could hear the concern in his tone. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, her voice shaky. "But I need to tell you something. There's something going on, something more than I even realized. Thomas has been hiding things from me, things that don't make sense. There's a name, Mason Clark. I found it in his stuff. It's like a secret he didn't want me to know about." Detective Harris's eyes narrowed. "Mason Clark? I know that name. He's connected to some dangerous people, Sarah. And if Thomas was involved with him..." He trailed off, his mind clearly working through the implications of what Sarah had just said. "Who is he?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Why is he connected to Thomas? Why would he be keeping secrets from me?" Harris took a deep breath, glancing at Sarah before returning his eyes to the road. "Mason Clark is a name that's been on the radar of law enforcement for a long time. He's been linked to organized crime, money laundering, and several unsolved murders. If Thomas was involved with him..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah could hear the unspoken fear in his voice. The drive was tense, filled with the weight of unanswered questions. Where was Thomas? What had he gotten himself into? And most importantly, was Sarah's family in even more danger than she realized? As the car reached the outskirts of Willow Creek, Harris turned onto a narrow road that led into the woods. "We need to get to a safe place. There's something bigger going on here, and we need to figure out what Thomas was mixed up in." The further they drove into the woods, the more isolated the area became. Trees loomed on both sides, their shadows stretching long across the road. Sarah had never been here before, and something about the place made her uneasy. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice strained. Harris didn't answer right away. He drove for several more minutes before finally pulling off the road and stopping near a small, weathered cabin hidden amongst the trees. The place looked abandoned, with its peeling paint and overgrown yard. It was the kind of place that seemed untouched by time, a relic of something long forgotten. "This is where I've been doing some of my own digging," Harris explained, his face serious. "I've been following a lead connected to Mason Clark, and I think this cabin might have something to do with it. We need to check it out." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What was hidden here? And what had Thomas been involved in that could possibly lead them to a secluded cabin in the middle of the woods? As they approached the cabin, Harris motioned for Sarah to stay behind him. He pulled out his gun, checking the chamber before walking cautiously up the rickety steps. Sarah's heart pounded as she followed him, unsure of what they might find inside. They reached the door and Harris tried the handle. It creaked open with a disturbing ease. The interior was dimly lit, the only light coming from the cracks in the walls. Dust and cobwebs filled the air, giving the place an eerie, forgotten feel. Sarah stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. She glanced around, trying to make sense of the disarray. There were old furniture pieces scattered about, broken lamps, and faded photographs hanging on the walls. But something was off. It didn't feel like a normal abandoned cabin. Felt lived in. "Stay close," Harris whispered, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. Suddenly, something caught Sarah's eye. On the far side of the room, a locked metal cabinet stood against the wall. It looked out of place in this dilapidated cabin. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she realized this was what they had been searching for, Harris moved towards the cabinet, but before he could reach it, the sound of footsteps echoed from the back of the cabin. Someone else was here. The footsteps grew louder. Each step seemed to echo through the cabin like a drumbeat in Sarah's chest. Her heart raced in her chest and every instinct told her to turn and run. But Detective Harris, who had his gun drawn, stood frozen in place, eyes narrowed and alert. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Who could be here? What were they hiding in this forsaken cabin? Suddenly the back door creaked open, and a shadowy figure emerged from the dark. It was a man tall and lean with a face Sarah didn't recognize. His eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating look that sent a wave of dread over her. "Don't shoot," the man said with a calm, almost mocking tone, raising his hands slowly. "I didn't expect company." Harris didn't lower his gun, his stance defensive. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. The man smirked, his eyes flicking toward Sarah before returning to Harris. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows your friend Thomas better than you might think." Sarah felt her stomach drop at the mention of Thomas. This man knew her husband? The very person who had seemed so perfect, so loving, was he involved in something this dark? Before she could speak, Harris stepped forward, the tension thick in the air. "You know Thomas? What's your connection to him?" he asked, his voice demanding answers. The man hesitated for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "You're in over your head, detective. This goes deeper than you think. Thomas, he wasn't just hiding secrets. He was living a double life." Sarah's mind was spinning. A double life? What did he mean? Thomas couldn't have been involved in something as sinister as this, could he? The man stepped closer, lowering his hands slightly. "You've seen the name, haven't you? Mason Clark. You're starting to piece things together." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Who is he? What's going on? What does he have to do with Thomas?" The man's eyes darkened. "Mason Clark isn't just some criminal. He's the head of a powerful underground syndicate that's been operating in the shadows for years. And Thomas, he was one of their most trusted assets." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "No, it can't be true. My husband was never like that." The man gave a dry laugh. "You'd be surprised what people are capable of when money and power are involved. Your husband, Thomas, he got involved with Clark years ago. He thought he could have it all, the family, the career, the money, without anyone ever finding out. But like all criminals, he made mistakes." Sarah felt a cold wave of realization hit her. All the pieces were starting to fall into place. Thomas had been hiding something. And now, the truth was so much darker than she could have ever imagined. "Why was he murdered?" Sarah asked, her voice small and broken. "What happened?" The man's face darkened. "Thomas got too comfortable. He started talking about getting out of the game. He thought he could walk away without any consequences. But in this world you don't get out. Mason Clark doesn't let people go. Not when they know too much." Harris took a step forward. "So, you're saying Thomas was killed because he wanted to leave?" The man nodded. "That's part of it. But there's more. Thomas had something Clark wanted, a file, evidence that could bring the whole operation down. He'd been holding on to it, hiding it, waiting for the right moment to use it. But Clark knew Thomas was planning to go public. He was a threat. So, he had him eliminated." A deep silence fell over the room as Sarah processed the words. Thomas had been murdered not because of some petty dispute or passion gone wrong, but because he had known too much, because he was trying to escape the very world he had become entangled in. "Where is the file?" Harris asked urgently. The man's lips curled into a sinister smile. "You think I'm just going to tell you that?" He shook his head. "It's hidden. And if you really want it, you'll have to go through a lot more than just me." Just as the man took a step back, ready to disappear into the shadows once more, Harris fired a shot into the air, sending a shockwave through the cabin. The man froze. "You're not leaving," Harris said firmly. "We're taking you in." But before Harris could move, the man darted to the side, disappearing into the woods beyond the cabin. In seconds he was gone, leaving only the sound of wind rustling through the trees. "Damn it," Harris cursed, looking after the man. "We can't let him get away." Sarah felt the world around her spin. The man had just dropped a bombshell on them. Thomas hadn't just been a victim. He had been part of something far darker than she could have ever imagined. And now, the secrets he had tried to bury were coming to light, revealing the depths of betrayal, danger, and the cost of trying to escape the criminal world. Harris turned to Sarah, his expression grim. "You're not safe. Whoever is behind this is not going to stop. They'll be after you next." Sarah nodded numbly, her mind racing. But Thomas, he died because of this. All of this, it was his secret. Harris placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know. And we'll make sure it doesn't go unnoticed. We'll find the truth, Sarah. We'll find the file and we'll make sure Mason Clark doesn't get away with this. As they stood there in the dim light of the cabin, Sarah realized that her life would never be the same. The man she had loved, the man she had built a family with, had kept secrets that no one could ever have imagined. And now, those secrets had unleashed a wave of danger and deceit that threatened everything. The search for the file was just beginning. But one thing was certain. Sarah's journey for answers had only just begun, and the true horror of her husband's dark past was far from over.